Hello and welcome to Smart Money. I'm Alishia Seckam. Well, as we all know, there are two certainties in life, death and taxes. And as such, comprehensive estate planning is essential in trying to mitigate against some of the ramifications of the inevitable. This even more so in what's become a global village, where it's not just local investment structures, but global structures which bring offshore assets into the fold that need to be factored into equations. Never mind whether your children have ceased their tax residency or intend to do so and settle abroad, increasing that complexity even further. So today, we tackle the top 4 questions clients have about global estate and tax planning and where to start when it comes to getting your affairs in order. Stanley Broun, who's head of Fiduciary and Tax at Sanlam Private Wealth, joins me now to break things down. Stanley, thanks so much for joining us today. As a starting point, why is proper and timeous estate planning so important? The assumption is, bottom line, needing to save on taxes and duties, but do the objectives and what clients want to achieve actually move beyond that?
Thank you so much, Alishia, for this opportunity. One of the key questions that clients normally typically ask is that question. And I think the first focus goes towards how do I save on taxes and estate duty? But in principle, when we look at global estate planning, what we endeavor to do for the client is to ensure that their affairs are structured locally and abroad in such a manner that there's an ease of transfer of assets from the existing generation to the new generation. And as you rightly pointed out, is that some of the generations sits within South Africa, but also quite a few of them sits abroad, meaning they have ceased their tax residency. And the question normally is how do they get access to their inheritance in the most efficient and effective way during the administration of the estate. So that global estate planning is a key role. So it's much more than just taxes, much more just than estate duty, but it's also about the ease of transfer of wealth, but also in addition to that, how do we preserve wealth in order to make sure that we structure it in a more tax efficient and effective manner for the client?
Okay, so that's the why. What are the main elements you look at and what needs to be considered when drawing up an estate plan?
So, Alishia, when I look at you as a client, as Alishia, I normally want to see you holistically in terms of what assets do you hold in South Africa? What assets do you hold abroad? But it goes beyond just what is within your estate. So we look at the pension funds. We're looking at all the life policies you might hold. We also look at, do you have any connection to an offshore trust where there is an existing loan account? What assets do you have abroad? Where are these assets located abroad? Because then things becomes a little bit more complicated. And clients always tells us we want to keep it as simple as possible. But in terms of the spread of the wealth and where that wealth is located, it's key and important that we have a full picture of the client, know all the assets liability, what are your business interests. Some of the key elements that we also look at is your marriage regime. Are you married in community of property, out of community of property, subject to the accrual system, etc.? And that all plays a key role in looking at the client. So we want a holistic picture of Alishia in terms of all of our assets locally and abroad that takes part in the administration. So we need to be able to say, if we've got all of the assets of Alishia and we see Alishia holistically, how do we properly plan to make sure that there is an ease of transfer of assets to the next generation? So we look at quite a number of elements and it differs from client to client. And I think that is one of the key things that what we do at Sanlam Private Wealth is to craft specifically a type of estate plan locally and abroad that is fitting for Alishia, because Alishia's circumstances is totally different to Stanley's circumstances. So that is key and that's important.
Absolutely. We, can't have a one size for, we don't have a scenario where it's a one size fits all approach here. So we're having the full picture, Stanley, enables drawing up this proper estate plan, right? That eases the process of winding up one's estate from a time and admin and red tape and a cost perspective as well. If you've got both local and offshore assets, how important is it to have an offshore will as well as a South African will? And does it matter if your will is in a language other than English?
That's a very good question, Alishia. So let's assume, Alishia, that you've got assets within South Africa, but you also have assets in the UK and assets within Germany. So when we look at you, it's important for us to look at whether the structure of your affairs are in order. So when we look at the global estate planning for Alishia specifically, we will say, how do we actually draft a will that will speak to the ease of the administration of that estate. It must always be as practical as possible. So for the South African assets, we typically advise our clients to have a South African will to cover all of these South African assets. In addition to that, although it's not a legal requirement, we do encourage our clients to actually have an offshore will as well. This basically and mainly assists in the ease of the administration of the estate. So let's assume you only have one last will and testament in South Africa, but you've got assets that's located in other jurisdictions, meaning that in certain jurisdictions, we need to obtain what we call a grant of probate. So that means that if we only have this one will, we need to go through a process with the Master of the High Court to get that will and letter of executorship sealed in order for that specific jurisdiction to accept that what we have given them is a valid signed will under the laws of South Africa. And based on that, if they are comfortable, they will basically issue us with a grant of probate, which will actually give us an opportunity to exercise our responsibility as executors in terms of the offshore assets. In addition to that, what is also key important is when you start having assets in countries like Germany or France, etc., the question is, can the will be in English? Yes, the will can be in English, but a lot of these countries actually request the will to be in their specific native language, for the lack of a better term, meaning that we have to take your English will and we have to translate it into German or into French in order to submit it to those relevant courts for them to actually issue us with the right authority in order to deal with it assets within that specific jurisdiction. So yes, it's not a legal requirement to have an offshore will, but if you as Alishia has got global assets, when we do the planning, all of this fits into the planning to make sure that when we address these issues, that we basically do not add unnecessary costs to the estate, meaning we have to get a translator, etc. And we know that the administration of an estate can take some time to complete. So how do we make sure we do not add to that additional frustration in the administration of the estate in order to finalize it? So it's not a legal requirement, but we typically recommend our clients just from a practical point of view because it does ease up the administration for us as executors.
And this whole process, Stanley, kind of takes you full circle, right? Because it ultimately works to help one structure his or her assets more efficiently from the onset, right?
100%. So when we look at the client, it gives you an opportunity. So when we start identifying these specific areas that needs attention, and the client looks at the overall plan that we put in front of the client, and we make some of these recommendations, it all starts to fit in. So typically, Alishia, I will tell the client it's like a puzzle. When you start putting this puzzle together, it must be a full picture. So it's different pieces in different jurisdictions, but you have to bring it together for the client. Out of that, you say, how do we draft the last will and testaments for those specific jurisdictions so that everything runs basically smoothly as best when you actually administer that estate. So it is key, it is important, and it's always good to see the client's eyes lit up when they actually see, okay, fine, these are all the elements, but there is a solution, and this is the way to go forward. And then basically in that, we assist our clients to draft the wills, to make sure everything is in the proper language, everything is structured properly, because this gives you the opportunity to re-look at your assets, the structure thereof, the distribution thereof from a fresh perspective. It changes your perspective, and then it asks, how do I go about distributing my assets fairly and in the way I wish to distribute it locally and abroad? So it does help the client quite a bit, and it helps them to restructure their affairs timelessly, because once you pass away, we cannot go back.
Absolutely. Well, Stanley, let's leave it there. Thanks so much for having joined us in conversation today. And with that roadmap of sorts, Stanley Broun is Head of Fiduciary and Tax at Sanlam Private Wealth.